As expected, when the brackets came out, Penn State has navigated its way to the semifinal of the college football playoff. Penn State, Notre Dame. Does it really get much better than that? We got Marty Leap on the line from Penn State Rivals to help us break down the Nittany Lions. As always, Marty, what's going on?
Oh, not too much, Mark. Excited for game Thursday. Should be a good one. I think these are two teams. We're going to get into it. The matchup extremely well, and I think they play very similar styles of football. And, it's one of the best kind of old-time, lost over the year rivalries, Penn State and Notre Dame. And it's kind of fitting because I feel like this game is going to be played very similar to how you would have expected a Penn State Notre Dame game of the 80s or 90s to be played.
Exactly. There are folks my age that would recall when Penn State, Notre Dame weren't necessarily had to play every year rivals, but being at the very top of the sport and playing on a regular basis, fairly regular basis, and being in the same vicinity regionally, those were quite the showdowns during that 10 or 15 or 20 year span there in the 80s and 90s. So they get together with more on the line than has ever been on the line between these two. Guess we'll start with this, much made of Penn State's New Year's Eve game versus what turned out to be a January 2nd game for Notre Dame almost 48 hours later, and that difference in preparation time for Penn State and a possible advantage there.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that's legit. Anytime you have an advantage in terms of just days of rest, recovery, whatever it may be, that's a thing, especially when it's 2 days. And both teams are coming into this pretty banged up, right? I mean, it's probably a pretty big deal that Abdul Carter gets 48 extra hours of rehab, of rest, whatever it may be, than Jeremiah Love's going to get, for example, right? So I definitely think that's a big deal for Penn State. It works in their favor. That's not necessarily going to be the reason why they win the football game, but I think it could be a factor. It really could, especially, again, where you look, maybe the two best players in this game, you could argue, Abdul Carter and Jeremiah Love. They're two guys you have injury questions about coming into this game. So, it certainly doesn't hurt that Carter gets those 48 extra hours that Love will not get.
So I was going in that direction. Next, Abdul Carter. Know that you don't have necessarily any firsthand information because they're trying to keep that under wraps, of course. But in addition to Carter, anybody else that's questionable for this one? And what do we know about Abdul Carter at this point?
Yeah, I mean, James Franklin has said exactly what you would expect him to say. Oh, he's going to work to get there. We'll see game time. Hope to have him, et cetera, et cetera. I'll be surprised if he doesn't attempt to play. I mean, Abdul Carter's been very cryptic with some of his social media posts the last few days as well, which indicate he's going to look to play in this game, which I think is a good sign even for the overall health of college football, because how often in today's college football do you see a guy who's in Carter's position to legitimately be in the discussion for number one overall pick in April be banged up in the postseason and not play, even with a lot on the line? So I think he'll play. Now I think his usage could be different. I think we could see him as more of his old traditional linebacker stand-up kind of spot to try and protect whatever, whether it's a shoulder, an elbow, bicep, whatever that injury is, try and protect it. Not saying that happens for sure, but it wouldn't surprise me to see it happen. And honestly, game planning for this thing, even if Carter were 100%, it would kind of make some sense, I feel, at least to have him almost work as a spy on Riley Leonard on a lot of plays, especially on, third and long and that sort of thing. So you might see his usage be a little bit different, but I fully expect Carter to at least give this a go for Penn State. And outside of that, I mean, I know Dennis Sutton got banged up at the end of the Fiesta Bowl, but he's fine. He met with the media after the game. James Franklin's not going to have a player who they have injury concerns with meet with the media, and he was at practice on Sunday. So they'll be fine outside of the guys that you already knew they weren't going to have, the Anthony Donkas and KJ Winstons of the world. But, I don't see any scenario where Carter doesn't at least attempt to give this a go on Thursday.
So Penn State comes out against Boise State, grabs a 2-touchdown lead. We're on the fringe of the red zone to grab a 3-touchdown lead after they had gotten the Ashton Jeanty fumble, which I will separate from the Drew Aller fumble in that Penn State, don't remember exactly who stripped it loose, but made a play on the ball. The defense made the play, stripped the ball, recovered it, as opposed to Aller just confusion on the mesh point. He fumbles. Of course, they're up by 2 touchdowns. An opportunity to go up by 17 or 21 doesn't happen. Boise State gets back in the ball game. I think at the closest spot that was a bit tenuous for Penn State was when Boise State throws a touchdown pass that would have made it 24-21. There's a hands to the face call against the guard, brings it back to like the 35. Next play, Maddox Madsen forced or made a bad decision, gets picked off. Penn State's able to thwart the rally, keep it a 10-point game and close it out from there. So how would you assess Penn State's performance against a Boise State team that certainly proved that they belong, but at the same time that Penn State's supposed to control? And I guess depending on your interpretation of the game, some would say that they did. I would tend to think that Boise State played pretty well.
Yeah, I mean, I thought Boise played well. I give their defense a lot of credit. They were going to continue to blitz Penn State, and they stuck to it, and they had some success with it. And I think that's something, looking ahead to the Orange Bowl, I think there's a lot of similarities in the blitzing schemes between what Boise State likes to do and what Al Golden likes to do. So I think that's something that on the mental aspect of it, Nicholas Singleton in particular needs to clean up a little bit for this game. But Boise, I thought early on they did exactly what you thought they were going to try and do with Genty. Penn State's credit, man, that looked like a defense that was motivated, who had heard for 10 days about Ashton Genty this and Ashton Genty that and the record and best back in college football. And, man, if it wouldn't have been for garbage time stats, they would have held them under 100 yards. So they came out and proved a point. I thought one thing they did so well, and this was epitomized on that fumble you mentioned, was you never saw just one guy try and bring down Ashton Genty. It was 2-3 guys that's up on the fumble, where Kobe King punched it out and Zakee Wheatley, because he was there to help make the tackle, was in position to get the ball. I thought Maddox Madsen, I will say, from a Boise State perspective, he impressed me with some things. He made some throws I didn't think he had in him. Now he also made his fair share of mistakes. With 3 interceptions were, all 3 of them were not exactly ideal throws or decisions for your quarterback to make. But yeah, I think if you're Boise State, not to make this too much about Boise, but you were 12-1, you were in the college football playoff. You went into that game as an 11-point underdog. And, if you would have cleaned up a couple of mistakes, now you got aided by some mistakes by Penn State. That fumble you mentioned when it was 14-0. I understand why Drew Aller handed it off, because his read there is the defensive end. The defensive end crashed, and if the defensive end crashes, you pulled out as a quarterback. If he hands it off, Nicholas Singleton probably walks into the end zone. It's 21-0. That game probably gets ugly and fast. But Boise, you hung around. You made some plays. You were in it in the fourth quarter, and I think ultimately, as the Group of 5 representative in the college football playoff, that's probably about the best case scenario you could ask for, right? Is in the fourth quarter, giving yourself a chance to be in the game and make a couple plays and potentially steal the victory. Didn't happen, but I thought they played well, and they did a lot of things that impressed me.
Appreciate you being here, everyone, at the Voice of College Football, Disputed National Champions. That's a book that we have released here in the last couple months, and this would be 2 good fan bases to pitch this to. Penn State, Notre Dame. This is about the 1990s, and it's not just a history book. It certainly takes all of the historical data and the breakdowns and the matchups and who got screwed every year and who got left out and was the vote valid, but it spins it forward to the BCS era, the 14, the 12 team, and the proposed 14 team playoff era. So a lot of Penn State and Notre Dame information and perspective right there. The link's in the description section down below. When you mentioned out of the gate, Marty, about these being similar football teams, that's my impression too. Like, okay, they have 2 of the best running back rooms in the country with a tandem of backs. They have decent wide receiver play, but not great. They have, just going through it, 2 of the best defenses in the country on all 3 levels, so forth and so on. Drew Aller, though, prototypical NFL quarterback, certainly can run. It's not a joke when he takes off, but that's not his game. Versus Riley Leonard, we'd all be surprised if he's the starting quarterback for an NFL team in 5 years. Probably will hold a clipboard, but he's a runner, and that's the dimension that he brings. So that's the first separation I can come up with between these 2 teams that's noticeable.
Excuse me. Sorry, but I agree. I think You mentioned the wide receivers, and it's crazy because I don't think there's any Penn State fan in the world who had you told them at any point this year, hey, Penn State's going to be in the college football playoff semifinals and have the better wide receiver room. Nobody would have believed you, but they are. I mean, it's wild to me. I didn't believe it until I saw the stats, but Notre Dame's leading receiver, Bo Collins, has 458 yards. Trey Wallace has nearly double that, and Omari Evans has almost matched that. So it is crazy, the wide receiver matchup, to see two teams who have struggled that much at receiver make it this far, which I think speaks volumes to the rest of the team. But, yeah, the quarterback matchup's an intriguing one. I think Riley Leonard, they showed against Georgia what they want to do to win football games with Riley Leonard. It's rely on the legs, especially, Jeremiah Love, like Abdul Carter, fully expect him to play, but I'm sure he's not going to be 100% or anywhere close to it. They're probably going to rely big time on his legs. And, it's the opposite of Penn State, where if Penn State wins this game, it's probably because you see Drew Aller hit 2 or 3 of those deep balls like they did against Boise State. There are at least 3 more that should have been hit where his receivers let him down and dropped just beautiful throws from him. Like you said, the prototypical NFL quarterback is there's a lot of NFL scouts who are going to rewatch that Boise State film. And I said it after the game, Drew Aller's film and box score did not match at all. I think he finished 17 out of 30, something along those lines, where there was just at least 3 or 4 just egregious drops, 2 of which should have been touchdowns in that game. But yeah, that may be, this game very well could come down to what performs better, Drew Aller in this passing attack or Riley Leonard's ability to use his legs and run the ball. And different from Drew, because Drew needs to use his legs too. But we've talked a lot this year where the improvement in Drew running the ball is extending plays. It's, hey, on 3rd and 3, don't be afraid to just tuck it, get 5 yards, get down, move the sticks. Riley Leonard is going to be a lot more designed runs. I fully expect Notre Dame to rely on that heavily again on Thursday. And yeah, it may come down to, if Riley Leonard's more effective running the ball than Drew Aller is throwing the ball, Notre Dame wins, and vice versa. If Drew's more effective throwing the ball to Tyler Warren and to these receivers than Riley Leonard is running the ball, then Penn State's probably the team that comes out on top.
Hopefully I'll effectively communicate this thought process. But Penn State has been what they've been for the last close to 10 years. 2016, obviously, was the breakthrough to the Rose Bowl, and they've been pretty much that program that we've talked about a zillion times in regards to being a top 10 program, having the issues with Ohio State and then Michigan. Okay, they come into a playoff, and now they're sitting in the Final Four in the country, but they beat Boise State, they beat SMU. That's who was in front of them. They had 2, one extremely comfortable win, the other one could be argued, but they won by 17 points. So is this the first, for even the James Franklin detractors, that this would be the mark of demarcation that, okay, this is Penn State elevated? If they win this game, you wouldn't think it would come this late, but because of the first 2 opponents, that Notre Dame and beating this team would be the first one that, oh, this is a different Penn State team. This is an improved, truly elite Penn State team. Yeah,
I've seen a lot of that. I like you said, SMU and Boise, that's who was in front of you. You got to beat who's in front of you, and they did. And, look how often during a college football regular season, look how often, in the NCAA tournament for basketball, in the NFL playoffs, whatever it may be, where the team who's heavily favored doesn't do that, right? And that's one thing James Franklin and his staff have been so good at Penn State, is when you're favored, especially by double digits like they were in both those games, taking care of business and doing it without leaving much doubt. I personally, I think the James Franklin big game narrative should be over. It's, I understand people want to see that brand name, victory, but you beat an 11-2 team that reached the ACC championship game. You beat a 12-1 team who had the Heisman runner-up, who had a historically great season at running back. You're one of 4 teams left. You've got 13 wins for the first time in program history. No matter what happens on Thursday, I feel like that narrative needs to be dead. It's not going to be dead. There are a lot of people in Penn State circles that the only way this narrative dies is if they win these next 2 games, especially if to get past Notre Dame and then play Ohio State and finally get over that hump in the title game. Which, if it comes down to that, boy, what a can of worms and talking point, just all kinds of great content and material that will be. But yeah, I think there's a lot of people who are just so set in their ways, set in their opinion on James Franklin, that again, like I said, unless they come out, win these next 2 games, win their first national championship since 1986, the opinion is not going to change. But to me, it should. To me, he's done enough. I mean, I know some of these victories don't mean as much as they did in a different era of college football, but those years where they were on the precipice of getting to the playoff and were one of the one or two first 2-3 teams out, you still beat a really, really good Washington team in the Fiesta Bowl in 2017. You beat a really good Utah team in the Rose Bowl in a game that wasn't particularly close a few years ago, right? You had a Cotton Bowl victory over a Memphis team that, again, group of 5, but if I remember correctly, was undefeated, had Kenneth Gainwell and I think a couple other NFL players on that team. Like, they were a pretty good group of 5 team. So he's won big games. Just because he hasn't beaten Ohio State regularly doesn't mean he hasn't won big games, because he's done it. He's won a Big Ten championship. He's got, I think, 4 wins against Michigan that everyone conveniently overlooks because they've lost 3 in a row in that series. To me, it should be a dead narrative. I think that James Franklin has continued to prove to be one of the 10 best coaches in college football. And, I always go back to it for Penn State fans. To me, it's twofold. One, name a coach that realistically would come to Penn State that's going to be better than and do a better job than James Franklin. And 2, if James Franklin were to hit the open market tomorrow, 95% of college football programs would fire their sitting head coach in a heartbeat to hire James Franklin. So, again, to me, I think it's a dead narrative. I think he's done more than enough to prove he can win big, important football games. I think I've seen a lot of growth in him as a coach this year also. Like the Minnesota game, the USC game, those are games that in past years they would have found a way to lose. That Minnesota game, past years, there's no way he calls that fake punt. No chance. And I think you're seeing growth in him as a coach as well. But yeah, to me, he's proven he can win the big game. But again, like I said, there are plenty of people in Penn State circles that, unless they come out, win these next 2 and are national champions, are going to continue to get on him about not winning the big game.
Marty Lee, Penn State Rivals. Get on over there. Check out Marty's work. Please like the video and subscribe right here, the voice of college football. But once again, it's Marty Lee, Penn State Rivals. Well, Marty, hopefully we can track you down next week and talk about a national championship game.
Hopefully. I've said it on our post-game show. I've said it on our boards. But and this kind of ties into the James Franklin discussion. If you haven't enjoyed this season as a Penn State fan, I don't know what to tell you. I've been following this team for 30 plus years. I've been covering them in some fashion for over a decade now. This is right up there with that 2016 team that came out of nowhere to win the Big Ten. Is one of the most fun seasons I've ever witnessed. They've won in exciting ways. There's 4 teams left. There's 134 FBS teams. 4 of them can still win a national championship. Penn State's one of those 4. For 10 years, you've clamored about, fans, and rightfully so, clamoring about wanting Penn State to be in this position. Well, they're in this position now. The ride's been a lot of fun. Enjoy it, because years like this don't come around all the time.
And I guess this time next week, we may add one other item to the list of talking points, and that would be, has the Big Ten wrapped up its status as the best conference in college football? But I guess we'll let this next round play out just to make sure. All right, Marty, appreciate you being here.
Absolutely, Mark.